In what was somewhat of a surprise reveal, it turns out that Playground Games is working on Forza Horizon 5, and it's due out this year. This is one of the most exciting announcements in the recent Microsoft Xbox E3 showcase this year. So exciting, in fact, that we actually wanted to make a separate video discussing it. And that's exactly what we're doing today. And to do that, I am joined by the man himself, Richard Leadbetter.
This is absolutely awesome, John. I think what really impressed me about it is just the fact that it came out of nowhere and it looks absolutely phenomenal, and we don't have to wait so long until we can actually play it. It's coming out this year.
Yeah.
So in terms of actually presenting a game, marketing it, it just looks phenomenal, and the fact that we don't have to wait, a year, 18 months to play it, awesome.
See, I actually think that this was, before we get to the game, I want to say this is a textbook example on how to do a big announcement for a game, because you're right, the time between announcement and release is relatively short, but more importantly, they showed a lot of gameplay footage, so we get a real taste of what it looks like, and it was a genuine surprise. I mean, in the business we're in, we often hear about many announcements before they come to pass. And this one managed to slip under the radar, and I actually kind of appreciate that. We really did not see this coming, especially knowing that there's another Forza Motorsport in development, which seems they've gone back to the drawing board on that one and really tried to make it something new and different.
Absolutely.
But here we have Horizon 5, and it opens up showing it's in Mexico. And that's another thing I love about the series, is that they're always picking locales that differ perhaps than what many other games will have tackled in the past. And they always seem to find these beautiful locations and really put a lot of time and effort into really showcasing, sort of compressing everything that makes a certain region so visually interesting. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just that, but it's also the way that they actually research the location, sample the materials, and just the kind of ambience of the sort of chosen location there. And it just pays off spectacularly here. But I think the thing that really sort of sets this apart is just the sheer density that they're going for here, in terms of the materials, in terms of the environmental detail. They're talking about going right down to the single needle on a cactus. That's just just phenomenal, really.
That's one of the first things we should talk about then, is the environmental density. So while this game is slated to come to Xbox One, you do get a sense that they've massively increased the overall scene density and the quality of the meshes. They use photogrammetry to pick up a lot of the materials, which look great, of course. But you get this real sense of granularity in the rock surfaces and just the general terrain structure, in addition to all the supporting objects around it. That today I actually went back to look at Forza Horizon 4, which still looks great, by the way, but the difference in terrain complexity is extremely obvious, and I think that is one of the first things that really stands out when looking at this new game.
Absolutely, yeah. And last night we were talking about, I think I mentioned initial disappointment that it was talking about in-engine footage, where you didn't really know what you were looking at. Interestingly, that same footage is labelled as in-game on the YouTube trailers. But more than that, the actual gameplay that we saw that was clearly the actual code running has that same level of detail, and they actually had these specific shots where when they move over to a new player, it lingers under detail. You get this sort of beautiful vista shot, and then the player kind of swoops in, and then the action kicks off. It was a beautiful way to demonstrate that this is real, this is the game, and it's I can't really say anything more than that. It just looks amazing.
Absolutely. They also have the long motion blur shutter speed that I love so much, which was an option in the PC version of Forza Horizon 4 when running at 60 FPS or higher, but wasn't on the Xbox for some reason. They went with the shorter motion blur shutter speed, which is kind of a weird artistic decision, but I'm hoping that by featuring it in this trailer, we'll actually see that transition to all versions of the game, so that's another nice thing. But really, I guess we should also talk about the ray tracing. So I think there's been some confusion on this, and we were initially confused as well. So early in the trailer, they start by showing the Mercedes-AMG Project 1 Forza Edition car, which looks beautiful, by the way.
Absolutely.
And you get a peek at the interior and everything. And the first thing they show, though, is you actually see that car reflecting its body within its own body. So like the flaps on the back and different parts of the car itself, the side mirror, all of this stuff reflects correctly in the body paint. So you're like, oh, wow, okay, so they are using ray traced reflections. But they did note that it actually seems to be only in Forza Vista for some reason.
Rendered in unparalleled detail and with ray tracing in Forza Vista, thanks to the power of the Xbox Series consoles.
Which,
Right.
we'll have to see what all of this entails, what this really means in the end result. But the thing is, though, is a lot of people are like, hey, you know, the in-game reflections, it looks like ray tracing. And I can see where the confusion comes from, but I believe it's just their dynamic cube map reflection probe system, where essentially they're capturing the environment and applying that to the car body, updating it each frame. And this is exactly the technique they used in Forza Horizon 4. And they could, of course, potentially increase the resolution of that resulting texture, I guess. But it looks really good either way. Like, it's not... Ray tracing would be nice to have on that, but I can understand why we might not see it in game, especially considering how difficult cars are to render within like a BVH structure. Like, we've been hearing a lot of developers talk about this lately, and just the complexity. You can't really simplify a car too much without it looking not good in the reflection.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and famously, of course, Assetto Corsa was due to have car reflections, and never really happened.
Exactly.
Yeah, but you know, in terms of what we're seeing here, they did actually they were quite specific that RT was in Forza Vista. I think maybe the confusion is that, you know, the car actually seemed to be situated in the game world.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
And that's, you could see it in that last shot when the car sort of rolls off down the hill there. So, you know, either way though, honestly, that's... I feel like with the quality of the reflections as is, there's almost no need to, you know, it's like a nice to have thing, but it doesn't really detract from the overall presentation, and everything else just looks absolutely phenomenal. And fans will also be pleased to note that during, by the way, those dense jungle sections, not only do we get a glimpse of their new volumetric lighting system, you can sort of see that sort of filling the areas. Like when they do that initial static camera kind of looking at the jungle, it really looks good. Like, it looks like you could plop Prophet down in that and give him his nano suit and you're ready to go. You know what I mean?
Well, we could possibly pitch that as DLC.
Exactly.
That would work.
But more importantly, since a lot of people have been talking about this stuff lately, I can say you can see clearly these foliage dense areas, the foliage does actually react to the car, sort of bending and snapping as you drive through it. I think it's great to see it here, and it actually adds a lot, because cars are large objects, and when you're driving through the trees, you kind of want them to react, and they do. So that looks great.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Also, the global illumination. You may have picked up on this. I'm not sure how they do it yet, actually. And I don't remember how they've done it in Forza Horizon 4 and before. But you can see, like in this scene here, when they show sort of like along the coast, the orange glow of the sand is sort of bouncing up off the sand onto the rocky structure, which is in shadow. And it's a very effective looking use of it there. And, you know, because you're moving so fast through the environment, they could probably use a pre-calculated solution that doesn't have the super fine granularity that you might want in, like, say, a first-person game where you're walking around, where usually you can sort of see some of the holes in the lighting, if you will. But here, you know, it seems very effective.
Indeed, yeah.
And it just gives it this vibrant look, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing is that even when you're sort of moving about at fast speed, when you get those initial sort of scenery shots before the car comes in, the GI holds up really well there as well. It just interacts beautifully with the sort of photogrammetry assets. So it just looks really consistent and really realistic. And I think it's just...
They've really refined their technique, I guess we could say. And it looks better than it's ever looked.
The more I look at stuff like this, the more I wonder what the Xbox One version is going to look like. And I kind of wanted some answers here, so I reached out to Microsoft. And when I say reach out, I meant sent an email. And we did actually get some answers back, which are quite interesting. So in the Direct, we were talking about the possibility that they're going to scale the existing engine, or they may do something similar to what they did with Forza Horizon 2, which was to basically use the last-gen engine. In that case, it was running on Xbox 360. But we did get some firm answers back here. So the reason we asked the question was because Mike Brown, the creative director, put out a tweet essentially saying that both the quality and performance modes would be running at 4K 60 on Xbox Series X, which is pretty phenomenal. So we did get some added context here, and essentially what we got back was this comment. While Forza Horizon 5 was built to showcase the abilities of the series consoles in order to provide best-in-class experiences on a wide range of PCs as well as Xbox One, we've invested in a number of scalable technologies such as dynamic resolution scaling, DRS, variable draw distances, and a robust level of detail system, LOD.
That all makes sense.
It does, yeah.
It basically sounds like they've just made their engine more scalable, as you'd expect. I'm sure they built upon the technology from prior games, and this is kind of the result. So, and it would make sense in terms of development as well. It's just easier to work from a single version and sort of scale it up and down.
Yeah.
But I guess the other thing, though, beyond scaling for last gen, we were also interested in the resolution stuff, right? Because previously it said, oh yeah, it's going to be 4K 30 on the Series X, and we were like, oh, so that must mean this is PC footage. But then he came out later and was like, no, actually the performance mode is going to be 4K 60. We were like, wait, what?
Yeah, so again, we got a comment here from Microsoft. Forza Horizon 5 runs at 4K 30 FPS on Series X, 1080p 30 FPS on Series S. However, for players that prefer to optimize for frame rate, we'll have a performance mode option that will run at 4K 60 FPS with select graphical features scaled to maintain a steady frame rate on Xbox Series X and 1080p 60 on Series S. So yeah, I mean, essentially they've got a whole bunch of systems within the game that they can scale according to the capabilities of the system and the target frame rate. So it's going to be, basically we should expect them to be making trades to hit 68 frames per second, just as they did with Forza Horizon 4's 60 frames per second mode on One X.
Exactly, but what's interesting here, though, is that they mentioned earlier dynamic resolution scaling, which has become very common, but that was not, I believe, in the console version of Forza Horizon 4.
Right.
It may have been on PC, I can't actually remember.
Well, historically, what they've done with this engine has actually been something quite remarkable. Rather than scaling resolution, they've actually had dynamically scalable settings. You know, they could actually change stuff on the fly. That's right. Because the idea was to maintain that kind of pristine look to the visuals, and that for them that meant resolution. But it looks like, basically they've expanded the system here, and there's even more scalability in this one, and the option to dynamically scale resolution is one of those variables now.
And that's key, I think, because on the One X for the frame rate mode, they went all the way down to 1080, which was quite a drop in terms of image clarity. And with dynamic resolution scaling, that should at least ensure that they'll hit 4K where they can, and if they need to drop it and the other details, they will. I suspect that the performance mode is going to be the preferred way to play this, almost certainly. And I guess we actually don't know. I mean, did they confirm whether the footage we saw was PC or was it actually Xbox Series X?
We don't have confirmation on that, but I would suspect it would be PC just to show the game running at its absolute best, and it certainly made a statement. But I'm curious about this 4K 60 target for Series X on the performance mode, because I'm wondering if there's folks out there who would prefer to have the max fidelity experience but at a lower resolution.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's room for a third option. We'll have to see.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Still kind of early days. Even though the game's out relatively soon, there's a lot of work to do in those final few months of development.
Yep. While we're here, though, a couple other details that I kind of wanted to mention while we're talking about the game. First of all, I really like, and this is something that was also in the previous game, but I love what they call the starburst highlights on the cars, the sort of the sun glare off the windshield and the back glass and everything. A simple detail, but it's very, very stylish. And they have like isotropic lens flares in there as well, and this adds a lot to the presentation, I feel. And in general, I like the variety of environments. Like the towns they showed were exceptionally detailed, and they could sort of they did that thing where they sort of freeze up the camera and like let it linger there for a moment, and you can see a distinct boost in overall like geometric density and texture detail compared to the prior game. And then there's the desert area. As soon as I saw those large stretches out to the horizon, I was immediately thinking of Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, the 2009 game. And obviously this is
in a good way.
Yes, in a very good way, because that was one of my favorite things about that game, is they really created this great sense of scale on these desert tracks. And this sort of captures that for a new generation, and I like the look of that.
I mean, literally, the horizon.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And speaking of horizon, they also showed that excellent scene with the dust storm on the horizon, which combines the use of the volumetric lighting. You can sort of see the light slicing through the atmospheric effects, and just all like the dust particles in the air sort of clogging the camera view. That's sort of an epic thing to showcase. I really like the look of that. And then, of course, there's also the events lab stuff, which could actually be really interesting, because you see some of the tracks behind there, and it kind of reminds me of Trackmania. Or the did you ever play the what is it, the Hot Wheels add-on for Forza Horizon 3?
No, I didn't, but I hear good things about it.
I did. It was really cool, and it kind of has this idea of like these tracks that are clearly exaggerated and like over the top. But it was really kind of wild to explore that within a Forza game.
I just really like the idea there. It's just a bit wacky, a bit crazy, but as long as it's kind of its own thing, it's just going to work, isn't it?
It looks really fun, I have to say. I did get a chuckle though. They tried to set this up as a fake multiplayer match, or maybe not a fake multiplayer match, but that's kind of the feeling you get at these E3 conferences when you have all the chatter. And you see how orderly people are behaved when they're playing together. Everybody's like clearly communicating what they want to do and what they're doing, and everybody's sort of just following the rules. And I'm just like, that's not how it usually goes. But it's a conference.
That said, there's a town scene where there's just random cars bombing about, and that's kind of a bit more like it. It's just online chaos.
It does get chaotic.
But even then, there are some aspects in there where they've got they must have choreographed those flying cars, arcing over you as you kind of drive through the scene there. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword, really. The multiplayer, isn't it? It is key to the Forza Horizon experience, but crazy, wacky, unrealistic stuff does ensue as a result.
I will say that they don't, in my past experience with it, is that they don't flood the world with enough players to really cause that issue, and most people in the world are just kind of driving and having fun. So it's actually, it works pretty well. It does give you this sense of being in a place with others driving around, and so it's a cool thing. I'm definitely a fan of that. But yeah, obviously, we're limited to this trailer footage here, which you've probably now seen multiple times over the course of this video. But it's just one of those things where I was really excited to see, Microsoft really bring something big and next gen to the table like this, that just looks like this. And I love what these guys do. This could be one of the most interesting games of the year if the last one is anything to go by. So
I mean, it's definitely moved to the top of my list of games I really want to see and really want to play now. And I guess it's assuaging a lot of fears, because when Microsoft committed to the cross-gen philosophy, which now of course Sony have kind of partly bought into as well, there was the concern that the games would be held back by the prior generation. But, we've seen some instances on PS5 where that kind of worked out, the cross-gen thing. And here, I just don't see this as anything other than a next-generation experience.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking as well. And the conversation around what's next-gen and what's cross-gen, it's very gray. It's not a black and white thing. You can't be all or nothing, because there's certain game types that can work really well and scale across different consoles, like I think this one. The disappointment I have with something like God of War is just like, fundamentally the original game had some design limitations that were created to ensure that it would work on a mechanical drive. And we're not going to see those, I'd imagine, not see those go away. So it does kind of vary from game to game. And in this case, we know that they can do this big open world driving game, even going back to the 360. It's just a matter of scaling down the visuals to work within the constraints of the older machines. And it looks like they've at least really leaned into the new hardware to deliver something that looks, I mean, this will probably be the best looking driving game on the market when it hits. So
yeah,
it's pretty
and
awesome.
I think we need one. I think it's something we've talked about in the past.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In fact, we actually had that question from a Patreon supporter, which is like, where are the next gen driving games? Well, Microsoft and Playground stepped up, and here we go.
I'm glad they stepped up with this one first too, because we need these arcade racers like this. I mean, it's not a traditional arcade racer, but this is more like from the school of PGR. I would say it's that kind of game, and it's so good. So yeah, it's definitely something to be excited for this fall, and we will actually sit down and look at it in much more detail when the game eventually arrives. So, but until then, I guess we'll finish up this video here. So thanks for joining me, Rich.
Absolutely.
And if you guys enjoyed this E3 coverage, be sure to let us know. Like, subscribe, notification bell, all the good stuff. You get instant updates from Digital Foundry. And you can check out the Patreon for direct downloads of our videos. So, until next time, though, this is John and Rich signing off.